No intros for this one, let's just pick up where we left off. Suppose that was an intro, wasn't it? Captain Britain's first writer was Chris Claremont. Alan Davis has said he was never a fan of the original Captain Britain strip, thinking that it had gone from poor to worse. I'm inclined to agree with him. Despite this seeming incompatibility, the two men had a great working relationship when, 11 years after the character's debut, they collaborated on Captain Britain's most successful incarnation yet, as a member of Excalibur. But nothing lasts forever, and by issue 35, both creators had left the title. As is often the case in comic books, when the original creative team move on, the quality of the book suffers. Excalibur seemed to suffer this drop in quality more than most, as a succession of writers and artists failed to maintain the series' original high standards. It was suffering, it couldn't go on, so it was probably handy that one of the original creators returned. Alan Davis wasn't sure if coming back was the right thing to do. The problem was, it was so soon after Chris had left. So soon, in fact, that it may have seemed a bit sinister, as though Alan had had a hand in manoeuvring Chris off of the book so he could get his hands on it. To allay those concerns, he rang Claremont, explained the situation, asked if he had any issues with him taking over as the new regular writer. Claremont, knowing that he had his own reasons for leaving Excalibur, said no, and so the team had a new but familiar writer, beginning with issue 42. If you want to get a series back on an even keel, Davis is the man for the job. As a writer, he has always known what direction a strip should be headed in, and he works hard to steer a straight course. When Jamie Delano was writing the Captain Britain strip, he was following Alan's plot suggestions. When the end results didn't work out the way Davis intended, Jamie was out and Davis scripted the stories himself. He is also someone who values continuity and consistency, something you will see evidence of in a bit. So it was that the series went from a string of writers and artists to its most consistent era yet, and, I would argue, its best of the whole series. It wasn't all plain sailing just yet. What's with all the nautical references? When Claremont left the book, he left a whole host of loose plot threads. Editor Terry Kavanagh wanted them tied up. Davis's first book back on the job. How well do you think he got on at tying up those threads? I'll be honest with you. In this and the previous episode, there have been plenty of issues of Excalibur that I haven't reread, because they're just too painful. But now, with the return of Davis, I'm more than happy to reread them. For a start, the TechNet have returned, and Gatecrasher has a plan of revenge that involves an innocent-looking egg. We then move from the intergalactic Keystone Cops to what is probably the most grounded scene in the whole series. It's the kind of thing we don't normally see in comic books. The superheroes after the superheroics. The team are fatigued, drained both physically and mentally. And why is this? Have they been fighting some evil supervillain? Some intergalactic threat? No. They have been saving lives at the site of a train crash. Megan tries to lift the spirits by cooking breakfast, by boiling some eggs, not knowing that one of them is truly a bad egg. But this does quickly become apparent after it escapes its watery doom and then cracks open to reveal hard-boiled Henry. This was Gatecrasher's plan, a powerful bomb disguised as a Tweety Pie ripoff. The team quickly see that there is just 1 second until detonation, a second that passes all too quickly. But it is still enough. Enough for Phoenix to protect her teammates from the worst of the blast. Gatecrasher isn't just doing this for revenge, for pleasure. She's doing it because she's still trying to capture Phoenix for Saturnine. The blast didn't kill the team, but they are unconscious, including Rachel. That actually makes Gatecrasher's job easier. Oh, hold on. Isn't that Kitty? It seems she phased when the bomb went off. As you can imagine, this means the tide begins to turn against the TechNet. That is, until Fascination gets her metaphorical claws dug into Kitty. Nightcrawler tries and fails to fight back. Megan tries and fails. And although Brian starts out doing well, Gatecrasher ensures that that doesn't last. That is until she suddenly freezes into place, along with the rest of the TechNet. So what's going on here? The hand of Saturnine is at play. She has sent 2 of her agents from the Ministry for Cross-Time Transport Regulation, Monitor and Control. They are there to deal with something that is causing a big problem to the interdimensional continuum, and its name is Widget. It seems that the cross-time capers and interdimensional doors that the little robot head keeps on creating are causing too many problems. These guys are there to ensure that that comes to an end. Whilst they are investigating Widget, Rachel is concerned. If these guys work for Saturnine, then why do they seem so unconcerned that she is there? After all, Saturnine wants her incarcerated. We will soon get an answer to that. But first of all, those 2 agents are taking a look inside Widget. And what we see is very impressive. Not because it contains any particularly complicated circuitry. In fact, it still contains the gunk that Tweedledope poured into it all the way back in issue 1. What is impressive is that that gunk contains exactly the same stuff as was shown back in that issue. Yes, the baked beans, but also the apple core, the key, the spider. Over 40 issues later, that is attention to detail. Despite these unconventional innards, the agents do succeed in reprogramming Widget. So now he will no longer be able to create those doors that cross worlds, cross dimensions. But that's not all, because one of the agents gives Brian a Psychcom crystal. Remember that from the special edition? And he says to him to give that to Gatecrasher once she recovers from her stasis. The team can't resist rearranging the TechNet, resulting in utter chaos when the stasis does wear off. And then when they are met by Gatecrasher's inevitable anger, we are reminded of just how awesome Excalibur are, especially Phoenix. Things only get worse for Gatecrasher, because when the Psychcom crystal is activated, just as happened in the special edition, there is a recorded message from Saturnine. The warrant for Phoenix is rescinded. Not only that, but the TechNet's exile to this particular Earth has been extended indefinitely. Of course, Gatecrasher is unhappy with this, but her team are even less happy, and the time has come for them to part ways. That sounds like good news, doesn't it? But Rachel is still concerned. Why has the warrant been cancelled? And the TechNet, well, they're now homeless. Where are they going to stay? They suggest a mutually beneficial arrangement. They will stay with Excalibur in the Lighthouse, and in return for that, they will repair the damage that they have caused. Brian is less than happy with this suggestion, but Nightcrawler manages to talk him around, much to the delight of Megan. Kurt warns her that she'll give Brian the wrong message, but innocent, naive Megan tells him not to be silly. Brian just isn't the jealous type. I have a feeling she may be wrong. And then we finish up by visiting an alternate Earth, where we see an individual called Kylun in action. We don't really know what the deal is with him, although he certainly does seem heroic. That makes it all the more concerning when he makes it clear that Excalibur are his enemies. So there you go. A few loose ends, such as Rachel's wanted status, and I suppose the nature of Widget tied up, but also a couple of seeds sown for future storylines. There is a distinctly domestic feel to the cover of issue 43. Chaotic, but domestic, reflecting the consequences of having the TechNet resident in the Lighthouse. And, what's going on there? Well, you remember there was always some kind of connection between Kurt and Megan, and that after 40 odd issues, it still didn't really go anywhere. Well, does that sound like a plot thread to you? Get Davis onto it. In this issue, we see a tender scene play out between Kurt and Megan. Actually, it's a dream. Kurt's dream. You know how confident Megan was when she said that Brian wasn't the jealous type? Yeah, well, first of all, she was wrong. Secondly, talking in your sleep can be bad for your health. So we get an inevitable showdown between the two, although Megan is completely oblivious as to what is behind it all, and it is she that calls an end to it. She makes it clear that it is Brian she loves. Brian confesses to some recent growing insecurities, and Kurt somehow manages to admit to being attracted to Megan in a way that just shows how great she is and what a class act he is. Tie a knot in that plot thread. What else needs Davis's attention? Well, in the next issue, the new and improved Lighthouse is unveiled. Rachel discovers that her and Megan's memories are kind of similarly structured, which may be why there was that explosive short circuit back in issue 9. Plus, when Brian is put on trial by the Captain Britain Corps for attacking Kurt, we see Linda McQuillan return as his defence, and Hauptmann England relishes the role of prosecutor. So now you see that Alan Davis really does like consistent continuity. Not convinced? Wow, tough crowd. Okay, well, how about this then? We also see Kylun fighting alongside his love Satnine against the evil forces of Necrom. You may not realise it, but you have seen some of these characters before. The druids that serve Necrom and Satnine herself appeared back in a single panel in issue 1 when Kurt visited the Lighthouse's basement to find himself in another world. That was just supposed to be a throwaway panel with random odd-looking characters in it. But now we see it has paid off, almost 50 issues later. Alan Davis has said that he was quite happy with how he tied up the loose ends from Claremont's run. Not just because it tidied house a bit, but because he felt he did it in a way where people would feel that it was in line with Claremont's original plans. But no, these are all Davis's ideas. To go back to the earliest issues and flesh out cameo appearances like this is amazing. Oh, while we're on the subject, if you hadn't already guessed it, Kylun is actually an aged Colin from back in issue 2. Aged because he's been in a dimension where time runs faster than in ours. Of course, Davis had an explanation for that. Which leaves us with the biggest loose end of them all. What was the deal with the Lighthouse's basement? It is actually finally answered in issue 46, and it ties in to Kylun's story. Here we see him pursue the evil Necrom into a tower, only to find himself emerging back into Earth 616. This is where his identity is confirmed. It seems the Lighthouse is one of an infinite number of towers that exist in multiple dimensions and yet at the same place. Or something like that. The Nexus energy that binds them is also the source of Cap's powers. Yes, I know, this is the first you've heard of it, but we all know how much they like retconning Cap's powers. Anyway, that is why Cap's powers faded when he went to America, because he was too far away from the Nexus. More of this is explained in issue 47. Actually, the very existence of the Excalibur team is explained here as well. Davis is out of control. Someone stop him. Actually, in this issue, he does something which is very Alan Davis. He casts shade on another writer's work whilst reframing it to make sense. We relive the events of the Possession one-shot, and Davis highlights the out-of-character behaviour of Cap and Megan. Cap sees himself congratulate Megan and Nightcrawler on their teamwork, and is self-aware enough to say it's crazy, as he has always been against regimented training. Straight away, when he sees Megan, he says it isn't her. She's all wrong. He points out that the mastermind computer is also inaccurate, and the most glaring error of all, Emma Collins, his old housekeeper, should not have been there. She's dead. Wow. If you ever write for an Alan Davis book, make sure your continuity is on point, otherwise he will roast you. He also did it in one of his clandestine books, but for the life of me, I can't find the pages, so you'll just have to take my word for it. By the end of this issue, the team has had a bit of a makeover. Brian and Kurt bury the hatchet, Widget has begun building himself a body, and not only Kylun, but also the extraterrestrial Cerise has joined the team. Their help is needed too, as the next couple of issues see a build-up to the big issue 50. First, we see all of the team members in action against Necrom and his many minions, as he combines with the Anti-Phoenix. Yes, the Anti-Phoenix. Why is this happening? Isn't it obvious? It's so that we can have an absolutely astounding cosmic level battle between him and our own Phoenix in issue 50. Other stuff happens too, such as Brian becoming huge in order to stop the multiverse from collapsing in on itself. The Excalibur team merge with each other because, look, there's so much lore and explanations in these last few issues, I just can't fit it all neatly into this episode. You'll have to read them yourself to pick up the many details that I've missed out. One thing's for sure, these plot threads are being tied into one hell of a bow. Oh, and by the end of it, the Lighthouse is completely destroyed and they all move into Braddock Manor. That's 8 issues into the new Alan Davis era now. Time for him to have a bit of a rest, as for the next 2 issues, he only provides writing duties. Even that is relieved of him for issue 53, as Scott Lobdell takes over for a tale that ties into that American debut back in Marvel Team-Up 65 and 66. Think that all of the Claremont plot lines have now been tied up? Not on your Nelly, because after issue 54, in which Davis returns with both pencil and quill and brings the Crazy Gang back with him, we get issue 55, which, apart from having a very clever cover, reveals to Brian what we've all known since issue 5, which is that Courtney Ross is dead and been replaced by Satya 9. Plus, of course, there is an awesome Braddock reunion. Betsy, oh yeah, sure. But I wasn't talking about her. Issue 56 is another great one. I was going to do a proper review, but we've just got too much to get through. We have the payoffs of both Jamie Braddock's return and Satya 9's reveal. We get a page that recaps and ties together events that we first saw in issues 3 and 5. Plus a few issues of the monthly Captain Britain title. We also get a very tense scene where Brian, under the influence of Satya 9, is compelled to kill Megan. Luckily, he has a stronger will than Satya 9 reckoned for. Then there's more action. Megan and Psylocke both being pretty impressive. Look, I told you, it's an awesome book. After that, Davis eases off a bit, only providing the plot for the next 2 issues. Scott Lobdell scripting, Joe Madureira with the pencils. And if you weren't sure what decade we were in by now, check out that X-Men lineup. Scott Lobdell was fully in charge of the next 2 issues, not only scripting but also plotting, before Davis returned in time for issue 61. Funnily enough, I wasn't going to review this one until I looked at my rough notes and saw exclamation marks all over the place. How can I not share that with you? This is a very Phoenix-heavy issue. The battle with Necrom in issue 50 left Rachel, the physical host for the Phoenix Force, severely injured, on the verge of death. As a result, at the end of issue 52, the Phoenix Force itself took Rachel to the stars to nurture her back to health. And it is in the stars that we now rejoin them both, recuperating, drifting, passing by worlds that are truly alien in nature, until Phoenix's attention is drawn to one of them, where a powerful process is underway, a process that she and we are familiar with, a process caused by Galactus. Oh yeah. Phoenix asks Galactus to stop his world-devouring process because this particular planet bears life. But he sees that as pure hypocrisy. She tries to reason with him, but he's not interested. He needs to feed. Therefore, she takes it upon herself to stop him by destroying his conversion machine. He is unhappy. He is who he is. He does what he must to survive. He knows Phoenix's history. He knows it has destroyed planets, taken countless lives, and he refers to it as the Chaos Bringer of old. Now, we've seen Phoenix take on Necrom. That was spectacular, but we weren't really invested in him, were we? He was too new a character. we've seen Phoenix take on the Beyonder. Now that was interesting. Would you like to see Phoenix take on Galactus? Of course you would. And you are right to do so. Plus, we have the right artist for the job. I dare say this is why Alan Davis chose this particular issue as his favourite standalone issue. He was given pretty much free rein to do what he saw fit, and he takes full advantage of that. Meanwhile, it seems that Brian is now into formal training, as he and Nightcrawler take part in a bit of practice combat. As always, Megan hates seeing this kind of thing. She worries about the two combatants being injured. But it's okay. Kurt is protected by armour created by Cerise's solid light. Oh, he shouldn't be able to hurt Brian that much, should he? It's okay, he's not losing his powers again. He's just a bit weak through tiredness. That's because he's barely had any sleep lately. He can't stop thinking about finding Satya 9 and making her pay for the death of Courtney Ross. He says nothing else seems to matter, something that Megan doesn't appreciate. Brian says that she's been a bit touchy lately. Kurt says maybe that's because he's been ignoring her. Brian says, I haven't been ignoring her, but I have been very preoccupied. She knows he loves her. To which Kurt responds, how does she know? Love needs to be expressed, nurtured. He understands Brian's rage, but the time has come for him to decide. Is capturing Satya 9 worth losing Megan over? Meanwhile, we get a full-page glimpse of what's going on in the heavens. Back on Earth, below Braddock Manor in fact, we meet up with Kitty Pryde. She is with one of the newer members of the team, Ferron, and she is desperately trying to get him to pull his own weight, something that he is not keen on doing. Now, we haven't seen Widget for a while. A few issues back, he started designing and building new bodies of his own, each one better than the last. Once they reached a certain level of sophistication, he disappeared for destinations unknown. Now, in the middle of the argument between Kitty and Ferron, he reappears with a warning of sentinels, of a final confrontation, of the doom of mutant kind. He doesn't stay long. Once he has repeated his warning, he then blinks out of existence just as quickly as he blinked in. Need I say, meanwhile? No, I don't think I do. Brian is finally making an effort with Megan, giving her the attention she needs and deserves. Look at that. What a picture. But Brian knows it's going to take more than romantic horseplay to show Megan how he feels about her. And so he does the honourable thing. And finally, after all these years, he asks her to marry him. And of course, she says yes. And a much less romantic encounter between another couple is about to come to an end. Because Galactus, weakened by hunger, is down. But the verbal sparring is not over yet. Phoenix says he doesn't have the strength to continue the conflict. He needs to renounce his evil ways. But again, Galactus points out that she is a hypocrite. He says the stench of death clings to Phoenix no less than it does to him. He reveals to Phoenix the origin of its power, an origin that even the Phoenix Force was unaware of. He doesn't deny that he takes life in order to live, but he asks how much life has been sacrificed so that the Phoenix can live. He says he is weak because he hasn't fed, but he points out that she is neither weary nor hungry because she is constantly being fed power. The source of that power is the sea of life yet unborn. Yes, he takes life, but she prevents it from ever existing. Phoenix has no answer to this, and she departs, leaving him to repair and reconstruct his world-devouring machine. And we are told that he, above all else, knows the guilt that Phoenix now carries. A big story with big ideas and a big revelation. Whatever next. Issue 62 sees the introduction of Cloud9, an organisation that incorporates a few entities that we're already familiar with. The RCX, who we first met back in Cap's monthly title. FI6, a government unit that narcissistic superhero Micromax works for, has been absorbed into them, as has the Weird Happenings organisation. They also have a vast number of Warpies working for them, which gives Davis the opportunity of creating a whole new crop of those outlandish character designs that he loves so much. Also in this issue, Nightcrawler goes absolutely nuts, fighting everyone on behalf of his teammates and winning. The next few issues are really good. Lots more lore and backstory, all courtesy of the Cloud9 storyline. There is also lots of action. Cap fighting and losing before taking an almighty beating and essentially dying again before Roma returns him to peak condition. And Excalibur and the whole of Cloud9 engage in a massive battle royale. Then we also have Widget's continuing brief visits and the Phoenix Force reanimating Rachel before she finally returns to the team but says she isn't staying. She is going to return to her original time in the future and free her world from the tyranny it lives under. Speaking of the future, let's look at issue 66, where we visit the far-flung future of 2013. Okay, well, let's call it an alternate future for the Excalibur team of 1993. We are now deep into the 90s. Not that I think you'd know it from reading this book. Apart from Kylan wielding a couple of katanas, stubborn old Alan Davis seems to have avoided all of the comic book tropes of the 90s. Enough about the 90s. I want to visit the future. And here we are. The year is 2013, the year of Days of Future Past, and Kate Pryde, the adult Kitty, has been apprehended once more by the Sentinels. Now she's the only surviving member of the X-Men. Rachel Summers' former handler, Ahab, is there, obsessing, as always, about recapturing his favourite hound. As a result of which, we get a little flashback showing us how Rachel escaped that timeline in the first place. She was actually sent back by Kate Pryde, not that Ahab and his cronies know that. That said, Ahab's colleague, Quinn, does a good job of guessing the storyline of Days of Future Past, although he thinks that it was Rachel's idea. Kate Pryde has some residual temporal anomalies that she picked up from Rachel when she launched herself into the past. The hierarchy are hoping to tune into those energies so they can recreate the time warp and use that to find Rachel and stop her mission from being a success. It may have worked too if it wasn't for Kate's mutant power. She uses this at a critical moment to phase through the machinery around her, disrupting it, damaging it enough to not only stop the machine from working, but to briefly tear a hole through time and space. Eventually that hole heals, and when it does, 2 years later, something else has appeared in Kate's place. Not much has changed in those 2 years. Sure, Ahab has had his cybernetic upgrades, but he's still obsessed with finding Rachel. An obsession that doesn't lessen when a Sentinel reaches out to grab Widget, but Widget vanishes, taking not only the Sentinel's arm with him, but with Rachel's name on his lips. Ahab knew he was right, and this time he will find her. And now we return to the past, the present of 1993, where Rachel is catching up on all the things that have happened since she's been gone. One of the most recent changes is that to the relationship of Brian and Megan. He says it feels like she's avoiding him, and he doesn't know why. She says that when he lost his powers a couple of issues ago, the beautiful energy matrix that she has always been able to see around him vanished, and she realised that that was what had attracted her to him. Now, when I first read this, I thought, Megan, that's a bit superficial. I'm very disappointed in you. Even Brian says to her, we are more than how we look. But then, annoyingly, she makes a really good point. She replies, are we? She reminds him that she looks the way she does now for him. She also reminds him of her natural look. She asks him, would he still love her if she always looked that way? And of course, he and we know the answer. Then we return to 2015 and visit the chamber of the Sentinel hierarchy. There, Master Mold reveals the next plans to Ahab. First of all, they'll get the Nimrod program up and running. That's going to take a little while. Whilst that's going on, they will establish which timelines they can visit, and once there, set up Sentinel colonies. With all those Sentinels in various timelines, the end of mutant kind is guaranteed. Speaking of other timelines, back in 1993, Rachel is explaining to the team that although Kate Pryde sent her back in time to give her a chance of living, she feels she must return to her native timeline whilst people there are still suffering under the yoke of the Sentinels. She must try to do what she can to overthrow them. Naturally, her teammates want to go with her, but she says no. This is something she's going to do alone. However, as she attempts to head back to the future, something goes wrong. Of course, Alan Davis does some great work on this book, but look at this next image. Look at the effort he's put in to showing these bare branches reflected in Widget's chrome. This is where Widget escapes to, still in 2015, but now he is in Britain, a country that since the Sentinels' invasion of various points in the timeline is also living under their tyranny, as is most of the world now. Widget has been found by a group of freedom fighters. And who are these people? Oh, blimey. It's a selection of Marvel UK characters. For a large chunk of their history, Marvel UK had really existed only to reprint American stories. Captain Britain was one of the few exceptions who had original stories written for him. Then, in the 90s, Marvel UK decided to expand their creative horizons, and they created and released a number of new original characters in their own books. Not all of these characters are completely new to Excalibur, after the team crossed paths with Dark Angel in her series. But she is now joined by members of the Knights of Pendragon and others besides, including someone who I reckon is facing a copyright case from Tony Stark. One of those characters, Tangerine, is psychic, and when she scans Widget, she finds not only him, but also a second consciousness, that of Kate Pryde. It's whilst Tangerine is trying to establish stronger contact with Kate's essence that Widget barks out a warning. The Sentinels are coming. And no sooner does he say that, than indeed a whole troop of Sentinels appear at their location. One of the freedom fighters has massive arms and an even more massive gun. And his name is Kill Power. Yep, it's the 90s. And Kill Power takes down the lead Sentinel with ease. Other Sentinels and even some Hounds are taken down by other Marvel UK heroes, whilst Tangerine persists in trying to link up with Kate Pryde's conscience. She doesn't really get much from her, certainly not before one of the Knights of Pendragon, Albion, is killed by Ahab. And now he wants Widget, his best chance of finding Rachel, restrained. Indeed, the Sentinel thinks he has done this, only to discover Widget's extra-dimensional nature. A nature which Widget uses as best he can to escape the Sentinel. In 1993, we see that as Rachel tried to leave the team, they were hit by a timequake, tearing them out of real time. She explains to them it's not her doing, but someone or something else from another time entirely. Then just as she feels the presence of the older Kate Pryde, Widget manages to stick his head through that particular temporal window. As he tries to pull himself through it, he pulls the Sentinel with him, creating an overlap of time, meaning that all of these characters, stripped of their own timelines, now occupy the same space. As you would expect, a brief battle ensues. We see some of the Marvel UK heroes in action. We see members of Excalibur in action. And then, as Ahab is about to dispatch Kitty Pryde herself, he sees Rachel as Phoenix in action. With this sudden change in circumstances, the Sentinels decide to retreat, taking both Widget and Phoenix with them. Excalibur have been left in 2015 with those members of Marvel UK. They want to know how to find their abducted teammates, but they are told that it is quite impossible. They have been teleported directly to Sentinel HQ. But Kitty Pryde is undeterred. Not Iron Man tells them that they would have to be insane to want to follow the Sentinels, as they now dominate the Earth. There are millions of them, each learning from the other's experience, each capable of adapting to overcome any foe. But now it's Nightcrawler who's defiant. Not Iron Man tells them that if they've encountered the Sentinels before, they must know that their friends are lost. But Kurt cannot accept this. Not while hope endures. He points out that they are stranded in the future. Their choice is simple. They either defeat the Sentinels or die trying. Them's fighting words, and fighting is exactly what we get at the beginning of the next issue. We see that whilst Excalibur were making friends with the Marvel UK heroes, the Sentinels were launching a massive attack against pretty much every other British superhero that still lived. I've talked before in my Empire Strikes Back review about how the use of colour is so important in these comic books. And here we get a great example, because this colour palette is perfect. Not only does it convey the drama of the situation, but sadly red is a very appropriate colour for the massacre that now unfolds. As one by one we see every superhero present cut down. Death's Head 2 is probably the best known of those characters here, and he fares no better than anybody else. This battle is so epic, so dramatic. Marvel UK really should have capitalised on it and released a limited series based around these events. It certainly would have been a better storyline than the Mistech War. Have you ever read that? Don't. Members of the Knights of Pendragon are there. That's not the good Knights of Pendragon series. That's the infinitely inferior second iteration. And how are we witnessing these scenes? We are seeing them through the eyes of Tangerine, who herself has seen them in what has been left behind after the battle. She says they should have been there to help their colleagues, their friends. But Not Iron Man points out that they wouldn't have made any difference. The only difference would be that they too would have been killed. Kurt points out that the Sentinels that they encountered earlier may well follow them there. And this is something that Kill Power doesn't appreciate, calling Kurt a coward and decking him. He's such a loose cannon. But on this day, despite his ridiculous proportions, he ain't the strongest kid in the playground. And Captain Britain puts some great moves on him to bring him to heel. Not Iron Man points out that Kill Power is a trifle impulsive. He's such a 90s maverick. We then discover that Not Iron Man, who himself carries a massive gun called Excalibur and has a great little logo on it, he is actually called Arthur. Not a particularly exciting superhero name, but I guess it relates to King Arthur. Another revelation comes when he removes his faceplate to reveal that he is that timeline's version of Nigel Orpington Smythe, a guy who on Earth 616 was causing a lot of problems for our heroes just a few issues back. In this reality though, he is a hero. Other things are different too, as he tells us that they too had their own Captain Britain and Meghan, a superhero couple who also had children, all of whom were killed when the Sentinels destroyed Braddock Manor. After some more discussion, it is agreed that Excalibur and anyone who wants to join them, which is basically everyone, are going to attack Sentinel HQ and save their friends. And they're going to do it by using a Trojan horse. Master Mold, meanwhile, presses ahead with his plans. The Nimrod project draws ever closer to completion, and 4 divisions of Omega Sentinels have been sent to apprehend our heroes. All the while, Rachel Summers is held in captivity. Trapped though she is within a force field created by Ahab himself, she is not completely helpless. Yes, she is psychic, but where Kate Pryde is concerned, she shares an even deeper bond, beyond telepathy. She reaches out to Kate's consciousness, and boy does she make contact. Now swimming amongst Kate's kind of cyber consciousness, Rachel is told it was a mistake to ever send her back in time, because in doing that, it alerted the Sentinels to other timelines, to other realities, to other mutant populations to exterminate. Now they are like a virus, infecting the whole multiverse. For everyone's sake, they need to be stopped from spreading. So what was that I was saying about a Trojan horse? Well, it's good, very clever, because one of the Sentinels that was downed by our heroes now appears to be back up and running. But it isn't. Instead, it is being animated by Cerise's solid light powers. And it houses, either in that little ball of light that it's carrying, or within its innards themselves, all of our heroes, both Excalibur and Marvel UK. They are making their way to the Sentinels HQ, and there's a bit of time to kill. There are conversations. Kitty unveils her new Yes It's the 90s makeover, and Brian and Megan, notwithstanding their recent difficulties, are about to kiss. But that's when Tangerine shouts a warning. Sentinels are approaching. Now, I quite like Kylun. I appreciate an original character. He's very good at martial arts, very good with those 2 katanas, but none of that has got anything to do with his mutant ability, which is the ability to perfectly mimic any sound. And he uses that now, to perfectly mimic a Sentinel's voice. One of the accompanying Sentinels asks it questions, and when Kurt suggests staying silent, the Sentinels assume that their comrade is in need of repairs, and they escort him back to the hive. In the hive, Phoenix has worked out how to drain her force field's energy, to soak it up. And when she breaks free, the Sentinels don't recognise the power that she's exhibiting. She is more than happy to enlighten them. Next up, she frees Kate/Widget and gets her to transport them to the hierarchy. And for Excalibur and for us, it's time for action. When the rest of our heroes arrive in their Trojan horse, they see dozens, hundreds of other Sentinels, the entire hive, racing to assist the besieged hierarchy. That's all the invite they need. The element of surprise means that 3 Sentinels are taken out just by their puppet. But that is just 3. 3 out of an entire horde. A horde that has now made it to Chamber H and Rachel and Kate. Kate warns Rachel of their arrival, but Rachel can sense their teammates nearby. She says not to worry because they are about to make a dramatic entrance, and they use their commandeered Sentinel one last time, before Kurt gives Killpower the nod to detonate his hand grenade. Then Killpower calls out, "That was awesome! I love grenades!" Of course you do. In fact, he wants to drop one on the hierarchy itself. But Rachel says no, it's pointless. The Sentinels will just evolve a new hierarchy, create a new hive. The only way to stop them all is to attack their core program. Meanwhile, whilst they're in the hierarchy's chamber, the Sentinels won't fire energy weapons, but the heroes are still outnumbered 1,000 to 1. Surprisingly, Killpower doesn't say, "I like those odds." And then we get guns, guns, guns. And yes, it is very 90s, but it does look good. This reminds Tangerine too much of what happened to her fallen colleagues. She says there are too many of them. They can't stop them. They're all going to die. So Cerise says, "Then pick up a weapon and die fighting." Are you watching Killpower? Because that was badass. Rachel and Kate have finally made contact with what passes for the hierarchy's brain. And, bizarrely, they seem to like what they see. Meanwhile, the battle still rages. We see heroes using their powers, using the big guns, and Ferron using his katanas, and, I think, making a pun? Is that a pun? I mean, it's factually correct. We even see not Iron Man with his giant Nerf gun. But still the tide of Sentinels presses forward. And perhaps we're about to witness Captain Britain's last act, which appropriately enough would be saving the life of his love. But the end he anticipates doesn't come. The entire hive has paused mid-action, seemingly instantaneously frozen. And this is the work of Rachel and Kate. They did it. They reprogrammed all of the Sentinels through their link with the hierarchy. As Rachel succinctly puts it, they've won. Or have they? Because everyone seems to have forgotten about Ahab. But he hasn't forgotten about Rachel. And now, whilst everyone else is distracted, he takes his opportunity to try to end her life. But his harpoon is caught mid-air by a Sentinel. A Sentinel that has achieved its prime directive, to protect all life. You didn't think they were going to be programmed to just stand still, did you? Ahab is defeated, but not captured, as he teleports away. Rachel lets him go. She isn't interested in following him. She isn't interested in him. None of this, for her, is about revenge. All she ever wanted was to change the timeline to bring back her parents. But now she realises that that just isn't possible. They are all products of their past, and to change it would mean that they would cease to be what they are. Not Iron Man thanks her and asks if she and the rest of the team will stay in that timeline to help them properly re-establish peace. She thanks him for his offer, but says that that is his destiny. But they, and even she, doesn't belong there anymore. She knows now, in her heart of hearts, that she has a new home, a new family, and a new future. And as we close out with a fantastic team portrait, Kitty says, "I love happy endings." So do I, Kitty. I know what you're thinking. Happy endings? Indeed so. Davis finished off his first ever Excalibur issue with a great team portrait. Now he's done the same thing at the end of his last issue. Davis is parting company with the book for a second time, but he leaves it in good health with an interesting cast of characters. When Claremont and Davis first left the title, there was a marked drop-off in the quality of the comic, but that was nothing compared to the cliff edge that the title now fell off of. I'm probably judging the next few issues a bit harshly. After all, Scott Lobdell does explore Cerise's background a bit, but Captain Britain disappears before issue 68. He was last in issue 67. Apparently, he was lost to a temporal wave during the team's return from the future. But this happens off-panel. How bizarre is that? And then, bit by bit, the 90s take a hold of the title. We had holograms on covers. The X-Men, including Cable, guest starring. Jean Grey's 90s face mask. Characters' knees poking us in the face. And all the while, the team slowly lost its identity. Phoenix left in issue 75, the same issue in which Brian Braddock returned with a 90s makeover as Britannic. Don't be fooled by how powerful he looks. He ends up being a peripheral character and the team's Hank Pym. And I'm not talking Ant-Man or Giant Man Hank Pym. I'm talking West Coast Avengers era Dr. Hank Pym with the hat. By the time we get to issue 80, forget it. We've got X-Men characters, X-Force characters. The X-Men were massive in the 90s, channeling the extreme tastes of the decade. And Excalibur, a series which started off with such a distinct feel, was slowly, inexorably drawn towards the blue and yellow. It became just another X-book, the tone of its stories no different to half a dozen other books you could buy in any given month. The series eventually drew to a close with issue 125, a story that finally saw Captain Britain marry Meghan. 125 issues sounds like a real success, doesn't it? But when you consider that the best stories by far were done and dusted by issue 67, it shows that it was really just the insatiable appetite for X stories that dragged the title on for another 5 years. There wasn't just the main series. We had more special editions, none of which were anywhere near the original's standard, a couple of annuals, a graphic novel, and even one of those annoying -1 issues that now sit at the front of everyone's collections. 2001 saw a limited series within which we see Brian become ruler of Otherworld, before, roughly 5 years later, Chris Claremont reinvented the team for a pretty decent series. Captain Britain made occasional appearances elsewhere in the Marvel Universe, but it wasn't until 2008 that he finally got his name on a mainstream Marvel series, as he and his new team, the British government-affiliated MI13, emerged from the wreckage of the Skrulls' secret invasion. And he's hung around the Marvel Universe ever since, never being in the centre of attention, but certainly making his presence felt. Excalibur were of course closely connected to the X-Men, and over time Brian has become a kind of adopted X-Man. In fact, the Uncanny X-Men gave us one last hurrah for the creative team that gave us so much pleasure with the character. In 2005, after the Scarlet Witch uttered those 3 devastating words, the entire Marvel Universe faded to white. The new reality that afterwards emerged gave us a story written by Chris Claremont, with art by Alan Davis, and which inexplicably starred Captain Britain. And that's not all, because within the pages of that story we got Megan, Mad Jim Jaspers, Roma, Saturnine, even Braddock Manor. Since then, he has been invited to join the ranks of the Avengers by Captain America himself, and even popped up in the 2015 Secret Wars series, which was nice. It took a good few years from his creation in 1976, with plenty of false starts along the way, but eventually, with persistence and help from top quality creators such as Chris Claremont, Alan Moore and Alan Davis, the original derivative creation became a fully fleshed out character who was so human, so flawed, that sometimes he was hard to like. Nonetheless, it seems Captain Britain did make it. He isn't an A-lister, probably not even a B-lister, but he is an established member of the mainstream Marvel Universe. And my history of the character is now at an end. Was it too rushed?